I keep telling myself I'm going to stop checking the camera footage. Every morning I wake up and I think, today is the day I unplug the thing, throw it in the trash, go back to living like a normal sleep-deprived father who just has a creative kid. And every morning I find myself sitting in front of the laptop with a cup of coffee that goes cold before I even take a sip, watching the timestamp in the corner tick backward through the night, looking for nothing, praying I find nothing, knowing by now that prayer doesn't work the way I thought it did. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34 years old. I live in a rented 2-bedroom on Callaway Street in Briar Falls, which is the kind of small Ohio town that looks charming in October photographs and feels like a slow suffocation by February. I moved here 2 years ago after the divorce was finalized, because rent was cheap and because Ellen took the house in Columbus and because I needed to be somewhere that didn't smell like everything I had lost. I got the apartment, I got my share of the furniture, and I got Max. That last part was not a consolation prize. Max was the whole point. Maxwell Daniel Marsh. He turned 3 in September. He has his mother's brown eyes and my terrible posture and a laugh that sounds like someone shaking a jar of loose change, which I mean in the best possible way. He is the reason I bother to buy groceries and wash dishes and remember that the world has things in it worth staying present for. That's not me being dramatic. That's just a fact about being a single parent. The kid becomes the axis everything else rotates around, and you're grateful for the gravitational pull because without it you might just drift. Our routine was ordinary in the way that routines with toddlers are ordinary, which is to say it was chaos with timestamps. I worked remotely as a technical writer for a software company in Pittsburgh, drafting user manuals and help documentation that nobody reads until something breaks. I would set Max up with his blocks or his little foam puzzle mat in the corner of the living room while I hammered out whatever had to be hammered out before noon, then we'd do lunch, usually something involving peanut butter or macaroni or, if he was in a particularly strong-willed mood, exactly nothing at all. Afternoons we went to Briar Falls Community Park if the weather held, or stayed in and watched whatever animated thing he was obsessed with that week. Evenings were dinner, bath, 2 picture books, lights out. I'd pour myself a glass of whatever was open, sit on the couch, and feel the particular exhaustion of a person who has been needed by someone very small for 12 consecutive hours. It was a good life. I want to be clear about that. I was lonely, sure, and tired in a way that had gotten into my bones, but it was a good life. I had my son, I had work I was competent at if not passionate about, I had a neighbor across the hall named Ruth who was 73 and made too much pot roast and left portions in front of my door without knocking. We were okay, Max and me. We were more than okay. The drawing phase started in early October. I remember because there was a coolness in the air that morning, the kind that smells like leaves and wood smoke and the first real warning that winter is coming, and Max had asked me to set up his art corner. He'd been watching one of those YouTube channels for kids where a grown adult draws simple animals and talks in a slow, patient voice while upbeat royalty-free music plays underneath, and he had decided that he, too, was an artist. I taped a long sheet of white butcher paper to the low coffee table, set out his fat washable Crayola markers, and made myself a second coffee while he got to work. He drew flowers first. They were the standard 3-year-old variety, a circle with oblong petals radiating out like a sun, a straight green line for a stem, 2 mirror image leaves that looked more like wings. He drew probably 15 of them, in every color the marker set offered, including the ones that made no botanical sense like purple and orange and silver. Then he drew cars, because cars were his other great love. Trucks, too. Anything with wheels. He narrated the whole time in a quiet, focused voice, talking to himself the way small children do when they're deep in concentration, or running commentary that was half description and half story and fully private, not really meant for me. I cleaned the kitchen and folded laundry and checked my work email, and when I looked in again around 10:30, he had moved on to something new. He was drawing a person. Or trying to. It was still the standard toddler figure, an oval head sitting directly on a rectangular body with stick arms and legs. He'd given it a green shirt and brown shoes, which was charming. He was bent over the paper very seriously with a black marker, filling in the details. "Who's that?" I asked, setting my mug on the counter and coming to crouch beside him. "New daddy," he said. He didn't look up. I stayed very still for a moment. It's the kind of thing that hits you in a particular way when you're a divorced parent, the phrase, "new daddy," because it carries a whole cargo of interpretations, not all of them comfortable. Ellen and I had agreed that neither of us would introduce new partners to Max without giving the other advance notice, but we were only 6 months out from the divorce being finalized and I was fairly certain she wasn't seeing anyone seriously. And even if she were, the term "new daddy" would be a strange one for a 3-year-old to volunteer unprompted. "New daddy?" I said, keeping my voice light. "What does that mean, bud?" "New daddy," he repeated, as if the phrase were self-explanatory. He pressed harder with the black marker, outlining something, and I noticed he was drawing the figure's hands very carefully. Very large hands, the fingers long and reaching toward the edges of the paper. "Where did you meet new daddy?" I asked. "Here," he said. "He lives here." I told myself that was just toddler logic. 3-year-olds live in a world where imaginary things are as real as concrete things, where the fish crackers in the pantry have opinions about being eaten, where the shadow on the wall at night is a character with a name and a backstory. I had read enough parenting resources during the pregnancy and the sleepless first year to know that imaginary companions were normal, even healthy, especially in children who were navigating transitions. And Max had had a big transition. New apartment, new city, a father he saw every day instead of a father he saw every other weekend at first, then full-time once Ellen started her new job in Seattle and we'd renegotiated. Change is processed through play. I knew this. I filed "new daddy" under imaginative play and left it there. Over the following 2 weeks, new daddy appeared on every drawing Max made. Flowers with a tall thin figure standing beside them. Cars with a tall thin figure reflected in the window. The figure evolved slightly, it gained more definition in the body, a sense of height, clothing that was dark and indistinct. The hands stayed disproportionate. The fingers stayed long. And the face stayed blank. Not blank the way a child's drawing is blank when they haven't gotten to the face yet, but intentionally, consistently blank, a smooth oval without any features marked, surrounded by what looked like dark, smudgy shading. I mentioned it to my mother during our Sunday call at the end of October. She laughed, which was the right response. "Kids do this," she said. "Your cousin Alicia had an imaginary friend named Mr. Krabs who she insisted slept in her bedroom closet for 2 years. She turned out fine." She paused. "Mostly fine." "The hands are weird," I said. "You think the hands are weird because you're projecting," she said. "He's drawing what he can draw. Don't assign symbolism to a 3-year-old's motor limitations." She wasn't wrong. I knew she wasn't wrong. I let it go. The sleeping issue started the first week of November. Max had never been a particularly difficult sleeper. He'd had his rough patches like any toddler, the 2 a.m. wake-ups, the brief phase of night terrors around 20 months that passed after a few weeks, but by 3 he was reliably going down after our bedtime routine and staying down until 6 or so. Not a bad sleeper. So it was noticeable when he started pushing back against the lights. It wasn't that he was afraid of the dark. He'd been sleeping with a small blue nightlight since infancy, just the soft ambient kind that barely does anything, and that stayed on. What he wanted was for me to turn off the hallway light before his door was fully closed. We had a ceiling light in the corridor between his room and mine that I'd habitually left on because I got up twice a night to use the bathroom and the apartment layout was awkward in complete darkness. Max started asking, then insisting, that it go off before I left his room. "Why, bud?" I asked, the third or fourth night this was happening. He was sitting up in his dinosaur pajamas with the serious expression he wore when he had decided something definitively. "It hurts his eyes," Max said. "Whose eyes?" "New Daddy's." He said it without hesitation, without any trace of uncertainty. "The light is too bright for him. It hurts when it's on." I stood there in the doorway with the hallway light still on behind me, throwing my shadow long across the bedroom floor, and I felt something small and cold move through me, something I couldn't immediately name. Discomfort. Not fear, that would come later. Just discomfort, the prickling awareness that this imaginary friend had developed a specific, physical complaint, had needs, was becoming, in my son's mind at least, something present enough to advocate for. "Okay," I said. "I'll turn it off when I go to bed." "Now," Max said. "Before you close the door. He needs to see the door close." I don't know why I did it. I think I just didn't want to argue. I reached back and flipped the hallway switch, and the corridor went dark behind me, and I stood in the sudden dimness of Max's night light and looked at my son, who was nodding with satisfaction, and I pulled the door almost but not quite closed, the way he liked it, and I went to sit in the living room with a glass of red wine and my laptop and tried to watch something on Netflix and couldn't concentrate on any of it. A week after that was the incident with the story. I had been reading Max's bedtime books. We were doing a phase of the M.O. Willems Pigeon series, which he found inexhaustibly funny, the pigeon's outrage at being denied things he wanted landing differently each time. I was doing the voice, the exaggerated put-upon wail, and Max was laughing in that jar of change way, and everything was fine, everything was exactly what bedtime should be, right up until it wasn't. He went quiet mid-page. Not the drowsy quiet of a child starting to fall asleep, but an alert quiet, a focused quiet. He was looking past my shoulder. Not at me, not at the book, but at the corner of his room behind me where his bookshelf was, where the nightlight didn't quite reach. "Max?" I said. "Shoo," he said. He said it gently, not rudely, the way you'd shush someone when you didn't want them to disturb something. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, "Move a little bit, Daddy. He can't see the pictures." The cold in the room hit me all at once. I noticed it the way you notice a temperature change when you step outside, sudden, physical, undeniable. The apartment was kept at 68 degrees, I was almost certain of it, but the air in Max's bedroom at that moment felt like the air inside a refrigerator. I turned around. There was the bookshelf, the board books lined up in their colors, the stuffed elephant Max had named Gerald, the wicker hamper in the corner. There was nothing else. "Bud," I said, and my voice came out slightly wrong, slightly tight. "There's no one there." "He's there," Max said simply. He reached up and nudged my arm, encouraging me to shift sideways on the edge of the bed. "Just move a little." I moved. I don't know why I moved. I shifted 6 inches to my left and held up the book again and read the rest of the page and then the next page and the next, and Max watched the pictures with an expression that suggested he was sharing them, and the cold did not lift until I stood up to leave, and then it lifted all at once, like a door had been opened somewhere, and the room returned to its normal temperature, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at my son, who was already closing his eyes, already drifting. Peaceful and utterly untroubled. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in my bed and told myself it was the wine and the suggestibility of a man who had been reading too many horror novels. I'd been on a Stephen King phase all autumn, which in retrospect was not ideal preparation for whatever this was. I told myself the cold was the old apartment building's heating system being inconsistent, which it genuinely was, which was a genuine explanation. I told myself my son was 3 years old and 3-year-olds have imaginary friends and this was that, this was exactly that, and I should not be lying in bed at 1 a.m. treating a toddler's pretend play as something that required investigation. I found the drawings in December. I had gone into Max's room to retrieve a pair of his socks that had somehow migrated under his bed. He was at daycare, I had a quiet hour, I was doing a sweep of the apartment for laundry. I reached under the bed frame and my hand found fabric, which was the socks, and then kept going and found paper. A lot of paper. There was a stack of drawings tucked against the wall where the baseboard met the bed frame, pressed flat like they'd been stored deliberately. I pulled them out. There were 20, maybe 25 sheets, folded in quarters and then unfolded, as if Max had been working on them sitting on the floor and then hiding them rather than adding them to the pile of artwork on the art corner table. I set them out on the floor of his room and looked at them in the gray December light coming through the window. They were all of New Daddy. But New Daddy had changed. He was not the simple figure from the early weeks, the stick figure abstraction with the blank face. These drawings had a quality to them that I can only describe as anatomical, not realistic, not anything close to what a 3-year-old's hand could produce in terms of technical skill, but detailed in a way that went beyond what Max's fine motor control should have allowed. The proportions were wrong in specific ways, the limbs too long, the torso slightly too narrow, the shoulders slightly too wide, but they were consistently wrong in the same ways across all the drawings, as if the artist had studied a reference and was faithfully reproducing what they saw. In the early drawings, New Daddy had stood beside me. In these drawings, New Daddy was above me. I was in them now, a small sleeping figure, unmistakably horizontal, drawn in a bed, and New Daddy hovered over me, the long fingers spread wide, the arms reaching down. The face was still blank but surrounded now by dark radiating lines, like a halo rendered in shadow. I sat on the floor of my son's room for a long time with these drawings spread around me. Then I took out my phone and called Ellen. "He has an imaginary friend," I said. "Kids have imaginary friends," she said. "I know," I said. "This one is specifically imagined to be hovering over me while I sleep." A beat of silence. "That's a weird one," she said. "How's he seem to you when you have him?" "Normal. Happy." "He's Max," she said. "He's himself. He seems completely fine." Another pause. Kids process things. Especially at his age. The divorce, the move. He's probably working through some anxiety about male role models or something. "Did you talk to his pediatrician?" "I hadn't. I made an appointment for the following week. But before that appointment, before I'd had the chance to relay any of this to Dr. Kaminsky in the bland cheerful examination room with the laminated poster of the food pyramid on the wall, 2 things happened. The first was Max telling me about my back. We were having dinner, pasta with red sauce, Max's unambiguous favorite, and out of nowhere, between bites, he said, "New Daddy says you have a spot." "A spot where?" I said. "On the back of your head." He twirled his fork, unconcerned. "Under your hair." He showed me with his finger. I set down my fork. "I have a birthmark on my occipital region, at the base of my skull, perhaps 3 centimeters across. It's dark, irregular, the kind my dermatologist monitors at my annual checkup. It is directly beneath a patch of hair I have always reflexively kept slightly longer than the surrounding area, not consciously, not deliberately, but as a habit my body arrived at on its own. I have never mentioned this birthmark to Max. I have no reason to. He has never seen it, it's not visible unless you part the hair specifically to look, and you'd have to know to look." "Max," I said, very carefully, "how does New Daddy know about that?" "He touched it," Max said. "He shows me stuff when you're clicking the light." He looked up from his pasta. "The clicky thing. In the hall. The light switch. When I turned off the hallway light before bed." "He shows you what I look like," I said. "The back of you," Max said, and went back to eating. The second thing happened 2 nights later. I had been lying in bed not sleeping, listening to the apartment make its old building noises, the pipes, the settling, the faint sound of Ruth's television through the shared wall, when I heard it. A sound from the hallway. A dry, papery, sliding sound, like something being dragged across the hardwood floor. Not a footstep. Nothing like a footstep. More like a slow friction, deliberate, traversing the corridor from Max's door toward mine. I lay there without breathing. The sound stopped outside my bedroom door. I got up. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking, I was moving on the instinct that says you have to know, you have to verify, uncertainty is worse than whatever you're going to find. I went to the door and opened it, and the hallway was empty and dark and exactly as it should be at 2 in the morning. The old hardwood was bare. Nothing had been dragged across it. Nothing was there. From Max's room, behind the half-open door, I heard him start to cry. Not the full volume, startled cry of a child woken from a nightmare. The quiet, distressed cry of a child who is awake and has been wronged by something specific. I went in and he was sitting up in his bed with his hands pressed to his cheeks, his face creased. "Daddy," he said, "you hurt his hand." "What?" "The clicky thing." Max looked at me with an expression I can only describe as genuinely aggrieved on someone else's behalf. "You turned it on. It hurt his hand when you turned it on." I had not turned on the hallway light. I had not touched the switch. I had opened my bedroom door in darkness and walked to Max's room in darkness. I told Max this. "You did," Max said. He was already lying back down, already settling. He said so. And within 3 minutes he was asleep again, and I stood at the foot of his bed in the dark and felt, for the first time without qualification or rationalization, genuinely afraid. December ground forward. I told myself I was going to tell Dr. Kaminsky everything at the appointment, and then when I sat in his office I told him an edited version, the imaginary friend, the sleeping disruption, the interest in anatomy. I didn't say it like that, I said Max had been drawing a character in very specific detail. Kaminsky was reassuring in the way pediatricians are trained to be, which is to say thoroughly and somewhat impersonally. Imaginative play at this developmental stage was expected, even sophisticated. The scenarios Max was constructing, the friend with physical needs, the friend who observed and reported back, these were signs of cognitive development, of a child building a theory of mind, understanding that other beings have inner lives and experiences. Was Max anxious? Was he eating normally? Was he social at daycare? He was, on all counts, fine. He was Max. He was himself. Kaminsky suggested we just observe and not make a big deal of the imaginary friend, since drawing attention to it could intensify it. He said most children naturally moved past this kind of thing by 4 or 5. He gave me a pamphlet about childhood imagination that I read in the parking lot and found not remotely useful. I bought a night vision camera on December 22nd. It was a baby monitor with an app, a small white dome-shaped thing that mounted to the wall, and it recorded continuously to a cloud server with a 30-day backup. I set it up in the corner of my bedroom, angled to cover the bed and the door. I told myself I was doing this to prove that nothing was happening, to have concrete evidence that the sounds and the cold and the feeling of something in the hallway were exactly what they logically had to be, the products of an overtired man's overclocked imagination, amplified by suggestible circumstances and a child with a gift for storytelling. I want to be honest about this part. There was a period of approximately 2 weeks, Christmas and the days around it, when things were quieter. Max's mother flew in and took him to her sister's in Cleveland for the holiday, which she was fully within our custody agreement to do, and I spent 4 days alone in the apartment and slept deeply and dreamlessly and woke up each morning feeling the uncanny lightness of a man who has put down a weight he didn't know he was carrying. The drawings were stacked in a folder on my desk. The camera watched the empty bed. Everything was still. I told myself whatever it had been was resolved, was over, was a phase that had ended the way phases do. Max came home on the 28th, and that night I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of his voice through the monitor. I lay still and listened. He wasn't crying. He was talking, quietly and conversationally, in the confiding tone he used when he had something important to share. "I know," he said. "I know, I told you he was here. But he'll go back to sleep." A pause. "His hair does that. All on one side. I don't know why. My hair was flattened on one side. I had been asleep on my left. I reached up and felt it. I got up and went to his room. He was lying down, eyes open, looking at the ceiling." "Who were you talking to, Max?" I asked. "New daddy," he said. "He was looking at you. I told him you were just sleeping and he should let you sleep. He reached up and patted my hand where it rested on his bed rail. He really likes watching you sleep, Daddy. I don't know why he does that. He just likes it." I checked the camera footage the next morning. I fast-forwarded through the night until I found the timestamp that matched the sound of Max's voice on the monitor, 3:17 a.m. On the screen I could see myself asleep in the bed, the covers pulled up, my left arm extended. The door was closed. The room was empty. There was nothing by the bed, nothing at the door. Just me and the room, and the clean recorded nothing of digital night vision. I watched the clip 4 times. Then I noticed the time Max had stopped talking, 3:22 a.m. I scrubbed forward to 3:20 and paused on a frame and looked at the bottom left corner of the screen, the edge of the frame, where the door met the floor. Max was standing in the doorway. He was in his dinosaur pajamas, holding a crayon in one hand, looking, not at me, I verified this, not at me sleeping in the bed, but at a fixed point approximately 4 feet behind my monitoring chair, in the corner of the living room where I was sitting right now, where I had been sitting with the laptop and the coffee going cold while I watched the footage. I sat with that for a long time. I told myself a lot of things. The angle was wrong. I was misreading the direction of his gaze. Children's eyes are hard to track in low-resolution night vision. There were a dozen explanations. I was still sitting there when the sun came up and Max woke up and padded out to me in his socks, trailing his blanket, climbing into my lap with the boneless confidence of a small person who had never had reason to doubt that the world was safe. "Good morning, Dad," he said. "Good morning, Bud." He settled against me and looked at the laptop screen, at the frozen night vision frame with me sleeping and the door with the small figure in it. He reached out and pointed at the corner of the screen, the corner behind my chair, the corner of the room that was now behind me. "He's still there," Max said. He said it helpfully, conversationally, the way you'd note that you left your keys on the table. Then he looked at the screen again, at the corner behind me, and his brow creased slightly. "He says don't turn around, Daddy," Max murmured. He was already reaching for my coffee mug, already redirecting, the way 3-year-olds do when a topic has been dispensed with. He's not done yet. He's still drawing. He peered into the mug and wrinkled his nose. "Can I have juice instead?" I have not turned around. I want to be clear about that. I am writing this with Max in my lap, he has his juice, he is looking at the laptop screen because he thinks he is about to watch a cartoon. The coffee is cold. The camera is recording. The cursor is blinking at the end of this sentence. Behind me, from the corner of the room near the floor, I can hear a slow dry sound, like a pencil moving across paper.